Hello all and welcome to this AWS tutorial. In our tutorial today, I will demo how to perform database rewind leveraging Amazon Aurora Backtrack. A few things to keep in mind before we go further ahead. Services used in this tutorial can incur significant charges. Hence, ensure that you clean up resources after this tutorial is complete. Prerequisites. Having basic knowledge of Amazon Aurora and its backtrack feature is a must. Hence, if you need to know the concept behind Amazon Aurora Backtrack, please refer to this video that I had created earlier. URL to that video is right here at the bottom. In this particular video, I discussed the concept of Amazon Aurora Backtrack and how Backtrack typically works. During this particular demo, I will not get into the details or the concepts of backtracking. Hence, please refer to this video in case you need to know the theory and the concept behind Amazon Aurora Backtrack. Steps for this particular demo. The first thing that we will do is we will launch an Amazon Aurora RDS instance. So we will create this instance as a standard create and ensure that this particular Amazon Aurora RDS cluster is MySQL compatible. You can launch this cluster in any VPC that you like. For this particular demo, I will launch this cluster in my default VPC. Ensure that the cluster that you launch is for the production environment because the backtrack feature is enabled for the production environment cluster only. Before we go further ahead, another thing to keep in mind is ensure that rest of all other settings are kept as default. Okay, so this is very critical and extremely important. Don't goof around with most of the settings and you will see that even I will keep most of the settings as default. If settings need to be changed, then I will let you know. So these settings that I'm highlighting right now, these are the set of settings that we will change, but rest of all other settings will remain as default. Okay, so let us go ahead and launch this particular cluster in AWS. So this is my AWS console right here. And this is my AWS Amazon RDS console. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Create Database. And as I mentioned earlier, this is going to be a standard create for Amazon Aurora. It is going to be compatible with MySQL. And I'm going to let the version remain. So this is the version. It is 5.6.10.10a. So I'm going to keep this version as is. The database location is also going to be regional. So we are going to let it remain. As far as the database features are concerned, we are again going to let the default selection remain, which is one writer and multiple readers. For templates, ensure that the production environment is selected. So it's already selected over here by default. Now we need to go ahead and provide a DB cluster name. So let me switch back to my PowerPoint here. So as you see, the settings that we need to change. The first thing that we need to do is we need to provide a DB cluster identifier, a username, and a password. Then we need to create a security group and ensure that port 3306 is open. Under additional configuration, we need to provide a DB instance identifier. And most importantly, we need to ensure that enable backtrack is checked. This is the key feature, right? This is the main feature. So this feature needs to be checked. And since this is a demo, and specifically only and only for demo, ensure that you disable enable deletion protection, right? So for your production environment, this feature should always be enabled. But since this is a demo, we will uncheck this particular feature. Okay, so let us get started by providing the DB cluster identifier. So this is where we are going to provide a DB cluster identifier, which is going to be my Aurora DB. So this is my DB cluster identifier, and I'm going to give the same as my username. It's up to you what you want to use as your username and your password, but it just becomes easier for me to remember. So I give the same username, password, and the DB identifier. So it's right here, my Aurora DB. Okay, and I've copied it over there in case I happen to forget it. We leave the DB instance size as default. Again, availability and durability is also going to be multi-AZ, create an Aurora replica reader node in a different AZ. So this is also going to be default. Connectivity. So for me and this particular video right now, I am going to launch this particular cluster in my default VPC. Okay. And if you go down and open additional connectivity configuration, you can leave the subnet as default. This instance does not need to be publicly accessible. So leave the default no, but we will change the security group. So right now by default, what you see is the VPC's default security group that has been selected. So what we are going to do is we are going to create a new VPC security group over here. And I'm going to give it the name as my Aurora DB SG. Okay. And port 3306 needs to be opened. So it's 3306 right here. We are going to let the database authentication remain as default, which is password authentication. And under additional configuration, we need to scroll further down and provide a DB instance identifier. And I'm going to keep that also as my Aurora DB. So basically, we have completed all of these steps. So we've provided DB cluster identifier, username, password, security group. We've opened port 3306, and we have provided the DB instance identifier. So the next thing that we need to do is, if you scroll further down, we need to go ahead and enable backtrack, right? So just go back over here, and to avoid the scroll on the screen, I'm just going to pause it and scroll further down to the specific section. But if you scroll further down, you will see enable backtrack, right? So this is enable backtrack. So as you see, this feature is available over here. And what we need to do is we need to go ahead and enable or check this particular feature. So checking this particular feature or enabling this feature will allow us to rewind or make any changes to our database. Basically, this is the backtracking feature. Only if you enable backtrack, then backtracking gets enabled for your RDS instance. It's not a default feature that's available. You have to enable this feature explicitly. Also remember that you need to enable this feature when you launch the instance. After you've launched the instance, you cannot enable this feature, right? So we need to also provide our target backtrack window, which I'm going to keep it at 72 hours. That's the max. It's up to you. You can put in any number of hours that you want. Maximum is 72 hours or 3 days. So as you see, the cost over here is shown as $86.28 for almost a month. So this could actually, incur significant charges on your credit card, guys. So that's why I'm going to repeat it again, that ensure that you delete this cluster and this instance after you have completed this tutorial and you've done practicing, right? So scroll further down and go down and uncheck the enable deletion protection feature. So this is checked by default, this particular feature, this last feature that I'm discussing over here. Go ahead and uncheck this particular feature. Okay, so that way, once you are done, you can straight away knock out this particular RDS instance. Okay, so scroll further down. So this is a enable deletion protection feature over here. So let's go and uncheck this. Okay. Now again, I'm going to repeat that this only needs to be unchecked because this is a demo environment, but ensure that this is checked and let it remain default in your production environment, right? Okay. So let's go ahead and now create the database. So click on create database, and that should go ahead and launch our Amazon Aurora instance. So there it is. So this is our Amazon Aurora instance is coming up. Okay. And it is going to take a while for this instance to come up. So by the time it comes up, let's continue further ahead with the rest of the steps. So the next thing that we are going to do is we are going to launch an EC2 instance, and we are going to install MySQL client on it. All right. So let's go to EC2. So this is EC2 right here. Click on launch instance, free tier. So this is Amazon Linux right here. So I'm going to select this particular AMI T2 Micro, which is free tier eligible. And I'm going to launch this again in my default VPC. So everything is going to remain default. It is going to have a public IP. Click on next, next. Click on configure security group. So we are going to create a new security group for this. And I'm going to give it my Aurora DB EC2 SG. Going to copy this in the description as well. And we need to ensure that port 22 is open, and also we need to ensure that port 3306 is open, right? So as you see, it's free tier, ports 22 and 3306. And then after the instance is launched and it's up and running, we will connect to this particular instance using its public IP address. Okay, so here I'm going to give port 3306. We can connect it from anywhere. Review and launch, and scroll further down. Everything looks good. And then go ahead and click on launch. I'm going to use my default AWS key pair. Acknowledge that you're going to use the key pair. Click on launched instances. And hopefully our instance should be launched shortly. Okay, so our instance has been launched. This is the public IP address that I'm going to copy and keep it right here. It will take some time for this instance to get initialized. So I'm going to pause the video and wait for this instance to come up. So as you see, our EC2 instance is now up and running. So we will copy its public IP address, and we will try and connect to this particular EC2 instance using PuTTY. So I'm going to copy the IP address over here. In appearance, I am going to increase the font size. And then finally, for authentication, we are going to select my private key file right here. So click on open, click on yes, and we will connect to this instance using the EC2 user. So as you see, we have successfully connected to our EC2 instance. So I'm going to switch to the root user. And then the next thing that we are going to do is we need to install MySQL client on it, right? So the command for that is sudo yum install MySQL. And hit on enter over here. And is this okay? Just say yes, hit enter. And it will continue further ahead with MySQL client installation. So in our case, our installation has been completed successfully. Okay, so we've finished these set of steps. So let's continue further ahead. So the next thing that we will do now is we will make some changes to our Aurora RDS instance, right? And every time we make a change, we are going to capture the time for that particular change, right? So let me go back and see if our instance is up and running, which it should be now because it's been a while. Okay. So it's 18th of October 2019. It's 11:22 p.m. in the night. And our instance is up and running. It's still creating a reader yet. But if I select this, let me see. Okay, I do get an option of backtrack. So let's click on backtrack. And it will give us the time from where then I can backtrack, right? So the earliest restorable time is 18th of October, 11:18 p.m. over here in New York. So I'm going to copy this. So this is our time when our server was launched, right? So this is the time. This is the base time. I'm going to call it the base time or launch time. Let's call it launch time, right? So this is the time. So 11:18. Right now it is 11:23. So what we are going to do is we will try and connect to our my Aurora DB RDS instance. So this is the connection string. So copy this, and we need to get the MySQL endpoint over here. Okay, so let's go ahead and get that endpoint. So I'm going to cancel this now and see if I can get the endpoint over here. So where is the endpoint? Okay, let me go back and look at, this is the endpoint right here. So it's my Aurora DB cluster, whatever else. It's in US East 1. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this particular endpoint. This is for the writer, by the way. To copy this endpoint and place it right here. So replace this endpoint over here. Our port is going to be 3306 and my username is my Aurora DB and the password is the same. So as you see, this is our connection string. So MySQL -h, your endpoint, hyphen capital P, your port, hyphen small u, and your username, and hyphen P to basically prompt for the password. So copy this, go back and paste it right here and hit enter. So sometimes it takes a while for this thing to connect. So let's just wait for it. In case it does not connect or you get an error, typically that happens because something is wrong with your security group, okay? So just to let you know. So it's taking a while, so let's go and check if was there in a security group. So we had created a separate security group for this particular RDS instance. So let's ensure that our security group is right, okay? So this is my security group right here, inbound. So there you see, that's where the problem lies. As you see, the source over here is only the current the current RDS instance, which is not what we want. So go over here and edit this and make this either the security group for your EC2, which is right here. So this is my EC2 security group, right? This is the EC2 security group. So select that and click on save. Okay, now let's see if that makes any difference over here. Hopefully it should allow it to go now. Okay, I'm going to terminate that command and try it again. Okay, so access denied. Okay. Okay, so it's still access denied. So let's go back and check. So I think it's my Aurora over here. And then I need to also add maybe this. So this is inbound. Let's check our EC2 security group as well. So I believe we have my Aurora SQL. So I think we are good. Okay, so let's go and check if this, hopefully this thing should work now. Okay, so that was where the problem lied. So I just changed and added the generic access as well to the security group. Okay, so ensure that you keep that in mind. Okay, sometimes I do some of these debuggings so that if you face a similar error in your environment, you know what to do. All right, so let's type the password. So it's my Aurora DB. Okay, and now we are logged in and connected to our MySQL SQL server. Okay, so let's go there. Okay, so we basically got connected at 11:28. So I'm just going to copy the time over here, which is 11:28. Okay, so remember we launched the instance at 11:18 p.m. We got connected at 11:28. And then the next thing that we are going to do is we are going to create a database over here called as books DB. So go back, okay, and say show databases. And as you see, we only have the default databases right now. So I'm going to copy, create database books DB over here, and it should create the database. And as you see, our database has been created successfully. So this database got created at 11:29. So I'm going to copy that time right here. Okay. Now, in order to ensure that there is some gap, I'm going to pause the video and come back to perform the additional changes, that is to create a table and to insert records after a few minutes, right? So we have some gap in between. So that way we can backtrack these changes easily. So I'm going to pause the recording and come back in a couple of minutes. So it's 11:33 p.m. and we'll go ahead with the rest of the changes, right? So the next thing that we are going to do is to create a table. So let's copy this. This is a table. We are going to create a table called as books. It has 2 columns in it. So let's copy this particular command and go back to our MySQL instance over here. So I'm going to do first show, use books DB. So the database has been changed, and let's see what tables we have in this. So show tables. There are no tables. So the next thing that we are going to do is we'll go ahead and create this table. So create table if not exists books. We have 2 columns in this table, and let's hit enter. So I believe our table should have got created. So let's do show tables again. And as you see, our table called as books has been created successfully. So basically this table got created around 11:33, 11:34. So I'm going to keep the time over here as 11:33, right? Or possibly 11:34. Okay, so the next thing that we are going to do is we are going to insert 2 records. So I've created 2 insert commands, as you see, and we'll insert both of these records over a period of time, right? So I'm going to again pause the video and come back in a couple of minutes to insert these 2 records. So it's 11:37 now, and the next thing that we are going to do is we are going to insert this particular record. So let's copy this record and then go back to MySQL, and I'll paste it right here. So it's insert into books, title and author. We have the book name or the title as Let's Rewind, author is name, and semicolon at the end. So let's hit enter, and I believe our record has been inserted successfully. So if we do select star from books, we should be able to see our record. So that's our record. And this record got inserted into this table around 11:37 p.m., right? So let's capture that time. Okay, so this is 11:37 p.m. when our record 1 has been inserted successfully. So I'm going to wait for another 2 minutes and then we do a final change, which is inserting the last record. And after that, we start backtracking this particular database. So as you see, it's 11:40 now, and we will go ahead and insert our second record, which is a second change into this table that we had created. So I'm going to copy the record right here, and this is basically turning around time, or turnaround time. Author is Amazon, and let's go ahead and insert this particular record. So our record got inserted successfully, and if I do a select star from books, we should now have 2 records in this particular table. And our record was inserted around 11:40 p.m. Right, so now as you see that over a period of time, we have made some changes to this particular database. Now we are going to leverage these changes to backtrack this database, right? So the earliest time that we can backtrack this database to is 11:18 p.m. because that's when this particular database was launched. Remember that our backtrack window is of 72 hours, but for this demo, obviously I have made changes in a few minutes. In real life, these changes could happen over a period of hours, right? You could have a difference of more than a day in between these changes. So let's say that something went wrong and I wanted to backtrack my database. And I remember roughly that, hey, I had created my database somewhere around 11:30 p.m., right? So if I backtrack my database right now, where I have this database, I have this particular table, I have two records also inserted. But if I backtrack this back to 11:30 p.m., the only thing that should be there on my MySQL cluster should be the empty database that I had created. Okay, so let us see how we can backtrack and turn time around and rewind all the database changes on the existing database. So go back to our my Aurora DB over here. Select our DB, click on backtrack, and then we are going to provide a time. So I'm going to provide the time over here as 11:30. So as you see, it's October 18th, 11:30, and I'm just going to make it 0 seconds, right? And obviously, when the backtracking is happening, the cluster is going to be unavailable. So let us click on backtrack DB cluster. And if a backtrack is successful, the only thing that should be remaining on our DB cluster should be the database. So click on backtrack. And as you see over here in blue over at the top, you can see that backtracking the cluster is currently in progress. Now, this is the beauty of this particular feature. As you see, I didn't need a snapshot. I did not have to go back and get something to restore. A new instance is not being created. It's the same instance. It's just that it's going to be unavailable for a few minutes, and hopefully this gets done really fast. But if everything is happening on the existing instance, right? So all the changes are being made on my existing instance. Okay, so that's the beauty. And once this database has been backtracked successfully, the only thing that should be there should be our empty database that we had created, right? So I'm going to pause the video and wait for this backtracking to happen. And once our database is backtracked, we will go and look at the changes. So as you see, our database cluster has been backtracked successfully to 11:30 p.m. So let us now go ahead and verify whether our database has been backtracked or not, right? So this is our MySQL instance. Remember, we had created a database, we had created a table, and we had also inserted 2 records. So now let's go ahead and see if we have this books table or not. So as you see, there's nothing, as probably the table does not even exist, right? So let us see how many tables we have. So show tables. So it's an empty set. So as you see, our database has been backtracked successfully. Now let's say, for instance, I figure out that, hey, it's okay, my database is there. And we can confirm that, our database is still there, because if I go into show databases, you can see the books DB is there, but it's empty. So my database is still there, it's in good shape, but I remember that I had created a table as well, and I would like to recover my table. So in this case, we just backtracked to 11:30, but now we want to move forth by a few minutes as well, because I would certainly want to, get my table back, right? Because my definition, my schema is there, and I don't want to lose that particular table, especially when I know that my database was created successfully and I'm okay with the way my database was. So maybe the error was somewhere else and I want to recover or go back and get my table again. So I can move forward and go back to the instance in time when my table was created. So this is the beauty of backtracking. You can not only move backwards, like move back, but you can also move forward in the forward direction or move forth, okay? So let's say if we go back to, this is our database, and we say, hey, I want to backtrack again. Okay, so I know that we backtrack this to 11:30, but let's say I know that after I created my database, after a few minutes, I created my table. So how about we, move it in front to 11:35? So if I move this to 11:35, that was approximate time that I had created my table. So if I go back over here and say, hey, move this to 11:35, and again, I'm going to make this 0 seconds and say that, hey, backtrack this cluster now. So, and move it to 11:35. So remember, I'm moving ahead in time now by 5 minutes. And after this backtracking is done, okay, our table should be available. So let's click on backtrack. And as you see, our backtracking is currently in progress. And it will backtrack this cluster to 11:35 p.m. So again, I'm going to pause the video and wait for this backtracking to be completed. So as you see, our RDS instance or Amazon Aurora cluster has been backtracked to 11:35 p.m. successfully. So if I go back over here and I say show databases, it will showcase that my database is available. If I do show tables, it should tell me that my books table is available. So as you see, our database has been backtracked successfully. But if I say select star from books, then this table should be empty because the records were inserted after 11:35 p.m. So as you see, this is an empty set. So I hope that this was helpful, right? So what we did was we launched a cluster at 11:18. We connected to the cluster at 11:28. We created a database at 11:39. We created a table around 11:33, 11:34. And then after that, we inserted 2 records. And then we backtracked the cluster to over here, right over here at 11:30 p.m. Right? And then we thought that, hey, we want to get our table back again. So we moved our cluster forward to 11:35, that is basically by 5 minutes. Now, if I want, I can move this back to 11:40 as to where it was. And again, if I want, I can backtrack it and move it back to 11:38. So the beauty of this particular feature is that you can move or basically unwind and wind your changes in time as you want. So you can move behind as well as you can move forward and get your database instance to a specific point in time that you desire it to be at. So I hope that this demo was successful and helpful. This is a very powerful feature, guys. It saves a lot of headache and a lot of time, especially let's say if you want to leverage this feature for testing, for testers. They create a lot of test data and then they perform a cycle of testing, and then they either have to rerun the scripts, etc., when they want to run a separate or a new testing cycle. So rather than rerunning scripts or anything, all that you need to do is just capture in time before you begin your test cycle that, hey, this is when the database was in good condition. It had only the master data, the test data that we had created. And you can easily rewind back in time in a few minutes without running into the hassles of executing any scripts, etc. Right? Or let's say if you make any changes and you want to undo those changes as well, you can certainly do that as well in your production environments. But remember one thing, when you rewind, it rewinds the entire DB cluster. You cannot rewind a specific table. So if there are other changes that are happening, you will certainly lose those changes, and you might have to run some scripts or either redo those changes all over again. So hopefully you like this particular demo. Do let me know if you've worked with Amazon Aurora Database Rewind. I would certainly like to know about your experiences. And I will see you shortly in some other video. Take care. Bye-bye.